They thought the house with my name on it belonged to them. But they forgot who actually controlled every single financial transaction. When my husband David told me, "Your room is now storage. If you don't like it, leave," I knew exactly what I had to do. One sentence changed everything. I will stop all transactions. The $400,000 house, the bank accounts, everything was under my name. I'm Jessica Martinez, and this is how I took back control when my in-laws tried to steal my home. It started so perfectly. My parents had just moved to their beautiful countryside villa after Dad's retirement. They left me their gorgeous 4-bedroom house in the city. The house where I grew up, where David and I had our wedding reception in the backyard. I thought we'd build our family here. "We'll take such good care of it, honey," my mother-in-law Margaret had said, her hand on my shoulder. David's family knows how to maintain a home. I should have paid attention to how she said David's family instead of our family. The first week was blissful. David and I arranged our furniture, planned which room would be the nursery someday. I stood in the living room, looking at our wedding photo on the mantel. "I thought we'd build our nest here," I whispered to myself. But the sounds from upstairs made me realize something was very, very wrong. Heavy footsteps, multiple voices, the scraping of furniture being moved. "David," I called out, "who's upstairs?" "Just Mom and Dad helping us settle in," he replied without looking up from his phone. But when I went upstairs, I found Margaret directing David's younger brother, Jake, as they moved boxes into what used to be my home office. My desk was gone. My books were stacked in corners. "Oh, Jessica, dear." Margaret smiled, that tight smile I was beginning to recognize. "We're just storing a few things temporarily. You don't mind, do you? Have you ever felt like a guest in your own home?" There was something in her tone, something proprietary, like she was asking permission in a house that was legally mine. "Temporarily?" I asked. "Well, until Jake finds his own place," she said, arranging his clothes in my closet. "You understand." And that's when David said those words that changed everything. "Your room is now storage. If you don't like it, leave." He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather, like this wasn't the house my parents had gifted to me, like this wasn't the house with my name on every legal document. I stared at him, at this man I'd married 2 years ago, at this man who was speaking like he owned the place. "Excuse me?" "You heard me, Jess. Mom needs space for Jake's things. Your little office can wait." Little office. Like my MBA from Wharton meant nothing. Like the financial consulting business I ran from that room was just a hobby. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. I wasn't the helpless housewife they thought I was, and they were about to find out exactly who controlled this game. That night, I lay in bed listening to them laugh downstairs, making plans for their house. David's arm was around me, but I felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. Do you recognize these red flags? The way they talked about the house like it was already theirs? I started checking the legal documents the next morning. Every deed, every mortgage paper, every utility bill, all in my name, Jessica Martinez. Not David's name, not Margaret's name, mine. See, what they didn't know about me was that I wasn't just some quiet wife who'd fold under pressure. I had spent 5 years in corporate finance before our marriage. I knew exactly how to handle financial warfare. Looking in the bathroom mirror that morning, I saw someone I'd almost forgotten, a woman who used to negotiate million-dollar deals, a woman who'd been hiding behind the role of sweet daughter-in-law for too long. And that's when I decided something that would change all our lives. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. This was a legal battle over property. And they wanted to play power games? I would play by my rules. The next sentence I spoke would shift the entire dynamic of our relationship. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went. Over the next few days, I watched them operate. Margaret would arrive every morning with more of Jake's belongings. David would rearrange furniture without asking me. They'd have family meetings in my kitchen about renovations they wanted to make. "We should knock out this wall." Margaret pointed to the wall between the kitchen and dining room. "Open up the space." "Great idea, Mom," David agreed. "I'll call contractors this week." I sat there, sipping my coffee, watching them plan modifications to my house like I wasn't even there. Have you ever been manipulated so smoothly you almost didn't notice? That's when I realized this had been planned from the beginning. Margaret's encouragement for my parents to move to the countryside, David's enthusiasm for us taking care of the family home, all those conversations about how we were helping the family. They had been waiting for my parents to leave so they could take over, but they still didn't know what they were dealing with. I started playing weak. I'd sigh dramatically when they moved my things. I'd look sad and overwhelmed. I'd even tear up a little when Margaret would make her little comments about managing the household better, while they celebrated their apparent victory. I was making phone calls. The first call was to Robert Chen, the lawyer who'd handled my parents' estate planning. The information he gave me was shocking, but not in the way I expected. "Jessica, since David contributed nothing to the down payment or mortgage, he has no legal claim to the property," Robert explained. "The house is solely yours under state law." But there was more. Remember how David had been drowning in credit card debt when we got married? Remember how I'd helped him pay off $50,000 worth of bills? Remember how I'd put down the entire down payment for this house because his credit was shot? They forgot who had the real power. And here was the weapon they never saw coming. Not only did I own the house outright, but I was also the primary account holder on all our joint finances. David's name was on the accounts, yes, but as a secondary user. Every credit card, every utility bill, every streaming service. Can you guess what I was planning? My parents knew everything. They'd been watching this unfold from their villa, waiting for me to call. Mom had seen Margaret's manipulative patterns from day one. "We were wondering when you'd realize what she was doing," Mom told me over the phone. "Your father has been ready to drive down there with his lawyer for weeks." I was looking in the mirror again, but this time I saw the strength that had always been there, the support of my family reflecting back at me. But I needed one decisive move. I was torn for exactly 37 minutes. Was I going too far? Was I destroying my marriage over pride? Then I remembered David's words. "Your room is now storage. If you don't like it, leave." They had chosen this game. The next morning, I put my plan into action. It started with a single phone call to the credit card company. "I'd like to report unauthorized use of my account," I said calmly. But that was just the beginning, because what I discovered next would prove that Margaret had been orchestrating this takeover for months. I found the text messages on David's phone when he was in the shower, messages between him and Margaret dating back 6 months. "Mom, has Jessica's dad decided about the villa yet?" "David, still thinking about it. Why?" "Mom, Jake needs somewhere to live, and that house is perfect for our family." "David, but it's Jessica's house." "Mom, she'll understand. Family comes first. Besides, she's not using that office room anyway." Our family, not including me. Have you ever been manipulated by someone you trusted completely? The messages revealed everything. How Margaret had been pushing my parents toward the villa, how she'd convinced David that I'd be fine with sharing, how they'd planned to gradually take over until I either accepted it or left. But they still had no idea what was coming. As I scrolled through months of planning my displacement, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not hurt, pure focused anger. And that's when I spoke the words that would change everything. "I will stop all transactions." I did exactly that. First, I called the credit card companies. "I'm reporting fraudulent charges on my account. Please freeze all cards associated with this account number immediately." David's coffee shop run that morning? Declined. Jake's gas station fill up? Declined. Margaret's grocery shopping for the family dinner she'd planned at my house? Declined. The electricity bill? In my name. I called to discuss irregularities in usage and requested a temporary service review. Internet service. My account. I reported suspicious activity and requested immediate disconnection pending investigation. Water service. Same story. Can you feel the power shifting? But the beautiful part was that they didn't realize what was happening at first. David called me around noon, confused. "Babe, there's something wrong with our credit card. It got declined at Starbucks." "Oh no," I said with perfect innocence. "Did you call the bank?" "Yeah, they said something about the account being frozen pending a fraud investigation." "That's so weird. I wonder what triggered that." Meanwhile, Margaret was calling David about the declined grocery transaction. Jake couldn't buy lunch. The Wi-Fi had mysteriously stopped working just as he was in the middle of a video game session. By evening, they still thought it was just a series of unfortunate banking errors. Until the electricity went out at 6 p.m. I was conveniently at my parents' villa that evening, having dinner with them and Robert Chen, my lawyer. We were reviewing some very interesting legal documents. My phone started ringing around 6:15. David. "Jess, the power's out. Did you pay the electric bill?" Me. "I thought you were handling the utilities now that your family is managing the household." Long pause. David. "What do you mean?" Me. "Well, since this is apparently Jake's house now and your mom is making all the decisions, I figured you'd want to handle the boring financial stuff too." Another long pause. David. "Jessica, what's going on?" That's when I realized something that should have terrified me but instead felt liberating. My husband was asking me what was going on like he had no idea what he'd done wrong. Like telling your wife her room was now storage and she could leave if she didn't like it was just normal conversation. Like moving his entire family into her house without permission was perfectly reasonable. But the real revelation was still coming. The next morning, I returned to find them all in my kitchen, in the dark, eating cold cereal and looking very unhappy. "Jessica," Margaret began in that tone that used to make me shrink, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About this childish tantrum you're throwing, cutting off electricity and internet because you're upset about sharing your space." Sharing my space. Like I was a toddler who didn't want to share her toys. "I'm not throwing a tantrum, Margaret." "Then what would you call this?" And that's when I said the words that revealed exactly who had the power in this situation. I would call it stopping all financial support for people who don't live here. The silence in that kitchen was deafening. "What do you mean, don't live here?" David asked. "I mean, this house belongs to me. The utilities are in my name. The mortgage is in my name, and none of you contribute a single penny to any of it." Margaret's face was turning an interesting shade of red. "David is your husband. David is my husband who told me my room was now storage, and I could leave if I didn't like it. In my own house." That's when David tried to backtrack. "Babe, I didn't mean it like that." But it was too late. Because what I had discovered in those legal documents the night before had revealed the truth about what Margaret had been planning all along. See, this wasn't just about Jake needing a place to live. Margaret had been researching property law. She'd been planning to establish residency for Jake, then claim tenants' rights. Once David was established as head of household and Jake as a tenant, they could potentially claim legal complications if I ever tried to evict them. She hadn't counted on one thing. I knew property law better than she did, and I had been playing chess while they were playing checkers. Robert Chen had prepared some very interesting paperwork the night before, formal eviction notices, trespassing warnings, and one document that would change everything. "You have 72 hours to remove all belongings that don't belong to the legal owner of this property," I said, handing Margaret the official notice. "You can't evict family," she sputtered. "Actually, I can evict anyone who doesn't have a legal right to be here, which is everyone except David. And David..." I turned to my husband, who was looking at me like he'd never seen me before. "David, we need to talk privately." After Margaret and Jake left to get legal advice. Good luck with that. David and I sat in our darkened living room. "I don't understand what's happening," he said. "Do you see how he still didn't get it? What's happening is that you chose your mother over your wife. You chose to make me a stranger in my own home. You chose to treat me like I was the problem for not wanting to be displaced by your family. But it's just temporary." "David, I found the texts." His face went white. "What texts?" "The texts between you and your mother planning this for months. The texts about how this house was perfect for your family. The texts about how I'd understand or I could leave." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "Your mother didn't want Jake to have a place to live, David. She wanted to take my house, and you helped her." That's when he tried to say he loved me, that he never meant for it to go this far, that his mother had pressured him. But you know what? It was too late, because I had already made the decision that would change both our lives forever. I was filing for divorce, and since he had contributed nothing to the house purchase, had no legal claim to the property, and had actively participated in trying to displace me from my own home, the settlement was going to be very interesting. Margaret had taught me something valuable. When people show you who they really are, believe them. David had shown me that when pressed to choose between his wife and his mother's manipulation, he'd choose manipulation every time. But winning legally was about to cost me something I hadn't anticipated, and the real price of this victory was just beginning to reveal itself. The phone call from Robert Chen came at 7 a.m. on Tuesday, exactly 48 hours after I'd served the eviction papers. "Jessica, you need to know something that changes everything." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. "What now?" "David never had any legal claim to the house, but there's more. Because he wasn't on the original mortgage and contributed nothing to the purchase, the divorce proceedings will be remarkably straightforward. The house remains entirely yours, and he has no grounds for any property settlement." I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Empty. But Robert wasn't finished. "There's something else. Your parents and I have been preparing for this possibility since your wedding day." "What? What do you mean, preparing?" "Your father never trusted Margaret's intentions. We've been documenting everything. The debt David brought into the marriage, your financial contributions, even the manipulative text messages you found. If this goes to court, you're not just protected, you're positioned to claim damages for the stress and displacement they've caused." For the first time in weeks, I felt the real scope of what my family had been doing to protect me. Have you ever realized that the people who truly love you have been watching your back all along? My parents hadn't just been passive observers, they'd been building a safety net. "How long have you known this would happen?" I asked. "Your mother called me 6 months ago. She said Margaret was asking too many questions about the house, about your parents' plans, about your finances. We started preparing then." 6 months. My parents had seen this coming before I'd even noticed the red flags, but the real revelation was still coming. "Jessica, there's one more thing. The house renovations David and Margaret were planning, the contractors they wanted to hire, we have evidence they were going to put those expenses on your credit, then claim the improvements as David's contribution to the property." My hands started shaking. This wasn't just about Jake needing a place to live, or even about taking over my house. They had been planning to steal from me financially, then use those stolen funds to claim legal ownership. "How deep does this go?" I whispered. "Deep enough that we're filing a restraining order along with the divorce papers." But as I hung up the phone, I realized something that should have made me happy but instead filled me with dread. I was winning. Completely, totally, legally winning. So why did I feel like I was losing everything that mattered? The next few days passed in a blur of legal paperwork and cold efficiency. Margaret and Jake moved their belongings out in sullen silence. David stayed in a hotel, calling me repeatedly with apologies that rang hollow. "Jess, please, we can work this out. I'll make Mom apologize. I'll set boundaries." But you know what? It was too late for boundaries. When someone shows you they're willing to displace you from your own home, apologies don't rebuild trust. The house felt enormous with just me in it. Every room echoed. I found myself avoiding the spaces where they'd left their mark. The scratches on the hardwood from Jake's furniture, the nail holes in the walls from Margaret's pictures. My friend Sarah came over on Friday night with wine and Chinese takeout. "You look like you won the lottery and lost your dog," she said, studying my face. "I feel like I won the war but destroyed the village to do it." "Jessica." Sarah set down her wine glass. "You didn't destroy anything. They tried to steal your house." "But I destroyed my marriage." "Andy, did you? Or did you discover it was already destroyed?" That question sat with me for hours after Sarah left. Had I been fighting to save something that was already gone? The call from David came Sunday morning. He sounded different, desperate. "Jess, you have to know something about Mom, about what really happened." "I know enough, David." "No, you don't. She threatened me." I almost hung up. Almost. But something in his voice stopped me. "Threatened you how?" "She said if I didn't help her with this, she'd tell everyone about the gambling." "Gambling? What gambling, David?" Long pause. Long enough that I started to understand why he'd been so secretive about his finances before our marriage. The debt you helped me pay off. It wasn't credit cards, Jess. It was gambling debt. To some very dangerous people. My world tilted, and Mom found out. She said she'd tell them where to find me if I didn't help her get the house situation set up for Jake. I sat down hard on my kitchen chair. "Are you telling me your mother blackmailed you into trying to steal my house?" "I'm telling you I was trapped, and I was too ashamed to tell you the truth." For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy for him. Then I remembered his words. "Your room is now storage. If you don't like it, leave." David, even if that's true, you still chose to hurt me instead of trusting me with the truth. I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself. There's a difference. But as I hung up, I realized Margaret had been even more manipulative than I'd imagined. She hadn't just wanted my house. She'd been controlling David through fear and shame, which meant I wasn't just divorcing my husband. I was cutting ties with a whole system of manipulation and control, and that should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt terrifying, because if David had been Margaret's victim too, what did that make me? The text message came Tuesday morning, just as I was getting used to the quiet of my empty house. "Margaret, we need to talk face to face. There are things you don't understand." Every instinct told me not to respond, but curiosity won. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. Margaret looked older somehow, less commanding than she had in my kitchen. "I want to apologize," she began. I almost laughed. Almost. For which part? The manipulation, the blackmail, or trying to steal my house? "For not realizing how strong you are." She stirred her coffee slowly. "I thought you were manageable." Manageable. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. "I underestimated you completely," she continued, "and I want to make you an offer." Here it comes, I thought. The final manipulation. David is miserable. He's drinking again. He barely sleeps. And I know that's my fault. "Margaret, what do you want?" "I want to ask for your blessing." "For what?" "David is seeing someone new, someone who reminds me of you, strong, independent, and I don't want to ruin his second chance the way I ruined his first." The words hit me like ice water. David was already seeing someone else. It had been 3 weeks since I'd filed for divorce, 3 weeks since he'd called me crying about how much he loved me. "How long?" I asked. "How long what?" "How long has he been seeing her?" Margaret's pause told me everything. "Margaret, how long?" 6 months. 6 months. While he was planning to displace me from my house, while he was letting his mother manipulate both of us, while he was calling me selfish for not wanting to share my space, He had been building a relationship with someone else. "She doesn't know about any of this," Margaret said quickly. "About the house situation, about the manipulation. She thinks David left you because you were incompatible." They still didn't get it. Even now, even facing the complete destruction of their plans, they were still trying to control the narrative. "What exactly are you asking me to bless, Margaret?" "Their engagement. He's going to propose next month." I stared at this woman who had spent months trying to destroy my life, who was now asking me to give her son permission to marry his affair partner. And you know what I felt? Relief. Pure, unexpected relief. Because this meant it was truly over. No more guilt about ending my marriage. No more wondering if I'd given up too easily. David had checked out of our marriage long before I'd ever stood up for myself. "Margaret," I said, standing up from the table, "I don't need to give David permission to live his life. And he sure as hell doesn't need my blessing to marry someone else." "But I thought you thought wrong. Again." But as I walked away from that coffee shop, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't angry anymore. For the first time in months, I felt free. Actually, truly, completely free. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in October. I dressed carefully that morning. My best navy suit, the one I used to wear to important business meetings. I wanted to look like the woman I was becoming, not the woman I'd been. David looked terrible. Thin, tired, like he hadn't been sleeping. His lawyer did most of the talking. When the judge asked if there were any final statements, I stood up. "Your Honor, I just want to say that sometimes losing something you thought you wanted is the best thing that can happen to you." David's eyes met mine across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw the man I'd married. Scared, overwhelmed, but not malicious. Just weak. And that was okay. Some people are strong enough to break generational patterns of manipulation. Others aren't. I was. Outside the courthouse, David approached me one last time. "Jess, I'm sorry for all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know." "I know you are, David, and I forgive you." His eyes filled with tears. "Really?" "Really. Because holding on to anger would just be another prison." "I heard you're selling the house." I was. The house had too many memories, too much history. I was buying a smaller place across town, somewhere that would be entirely mine from the beginning. "What will you do with the money?" he asked. "I'm starting a consulting firm, helping other women navigate financial independence during divorce." He smiled for the first time since this whole mess began. "That's perfect for you." "Yeah, it is." As he walked away toward his car and toward his new life with someone else, I felt something I hadn't expected. Grateful. Not for the betrayal, not for the manipulation, not for the pain, but for the strength I'd discovered when I'd been forced to fight for myself. The house sold quickly. I donated half the profit to a women's shelter and used the rest as seed money for my new business. My parents helped me move into my new place, a bright, modern condo with huge windows and space for a real home office. "Are you happy?" Mom asked as we unpacked boxes in my new kitchen. I thought about it, really thought about it. "I'm at peace," I said finally, "which might be better than happy." "How so?" "Happy can be taken away by other people's choices. Peace comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes next." A year later, I ran into Margaret at the grocery store. She looked smaller somehow, older. Jake had moved to another state for work. David's new marriage was struggling. Apparently, his patterns of letting his mother interfere hadn't changed. "Jessica," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't, Margaret. We're even." "How are we even?" "You taught me something valuable. You taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was, that I can protect myself, that I don't have to accept being treated poorly just to keep the peace." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad someone learned something from this mess. We all did. The question is what we do with those lessons. As I drove home to my peaceful condo, I thought about the women who'd started calling my consulting firm, women who'd found my story online. I'd started sharing it on social media to help others recognize the signs of financial manipulation. Sarah from Atlanta, whose husband had secretly refinanced their house to fund his business. Maria from Phoenix, whose in-laws had convinced her to put their names on her inheritance. Linda from Seattle, whose family had been using her credit cards for years while calling her selfish for wanting to say no. Each of them had felt crazy, alone, unsure if they were overreacting. Each of them had needed to hear that protecting yourself isn't selfish. Each of them had needed permission to value their own peace over other people's comfort. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually need. I thought I wanted a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. What I needed was a life that felt right from the inside. I thought I wanted David to choose me over his mother. What I needed was to choose myself over anyone who wouldn't. I thought I wanted to keep the peace. What I needed was to learn that some peace isn't worth keeping. The house with my name on it had been mine legally, but my life with my choices as my own, that was mine completely. And sometimes, losing everything is just another word for freedom. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own life, like you're being manipulated into accepting less than you deserve, like you're crazy for wanting basic respect in your own home, you're not crazy. Trust your instincts, protect your peace, and remember, the price of freedom is never too high when the alternative is losing yourself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop allowing what you've been allowing. What would your story look like if you stopped accepting what you've been accepting?